He is Eric DeCosta. Eric, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing great, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And, every once in a while when I do one of these interviews, I actually take a second or two to do some research. And I realized that you have been with the Ravens for 25 years. That is unheard of in this business. How in the world have you stayed in one place in the NFL where everybody's always moving around? How have you done it for 25 years?
I try to be nice to people, Mike. It's been a great run. I've been fortunate to have a lot of great people working here, coaches and scouts, tremendous ownership over the years, and it's just a great place to work, so I've never wanted to leave. Plus, my wife is from here, so she's never let me leave.
But it's nearly half your life, and it's the first job you took in the NFL. What was your mindset when you started? Because you're walking into a business where everybody's always moving around after a year or two. There's an opportunity somewhere else, or you're asked to leave, or whatever the case may be. When you started, did you have any inkling that you were going to put down roots and
off I'd be? And one of the great pieces of advice that somebody gave me a long time ago was understand what everybody else is doing, what their jobs are in the organization. And so early on, I tried to understand what the equipment managers did and the trainers and the PR people and the community relations people. And I think that's been a secret of my success.
And, one of the realities now that we're the old guys and we can impart advice to others is that willingness and that drive and that determination early on to pay your dues, to bust your ass, to prove yourself that way. No one's going to install you in a big job when you walk through the door. You got to earn it. And one way that you prove that you earn it, in addition to being nice to everybody and not pissing anyone off and not having people there who want to get rid of you, is you work hard and people notice hard work. You don't have to go tell everybody, hey, look how hard I'm working. They notice that you're working hard.
Yeah, I think that's true, Mike. And then I also think that a little success breeds continuity. And one of the things that I think people would admire about the Ravens is the fact that we've been able to sustain continuity for so long with only 2 general managers and 3 head coaches. That makes a big difference in organizations at any level. And I think that's something that's quietly made us a very good organization.
Well, and I think you're right. It's easy for other teams to want to emulate franchises like the Ravens and the Steelers and have continuity and stability. It's easy to do it if you continue to be successful, because then you never hit that stretch where maybe ownership is bowing to pressure from fans to make a change. And it is amazing that when you consider it, 2 of the models of consistency in the entire league are in the same division, battling with each other every year, yet both have been good enough that you can enjoy that consistency and stability for a period of decades.
That's true. And I think you have to have a lot of admiration for the Rooney family and the Bisciottis, Steve, as well, for being patient and understanding the challenges, unique challenges in this business, in that, sometimes it takes time to build something that will long-term sustain.
All right, now that the draft is over, we've had a week since round 1. What grade would you give the Baltimore Ravens 2021 draft?
I'd probably give them a C+, B, B. I mean, nobody really knows, Mike. Some of the best drafts I thought we ever had ended up probably being some of the worst drafts we ever had. And then on the flip side of that, you'll have a draft that looks like, average on paper, but then as you go back and look at it 4 or 5 years down the road, you just can't believe how lucky you got. So there's so many factors that go into a draft. One of the biggest things is just players staying healthy and getting a chance to play. Durability is a critical thing for players, and guys that stay healthy and play usually end up playing pretty well and contributing. And then sometimes you take a guy, as you've seen it a million times, a guy gets picked pretty high, and the first thing that happens to him in training camp is he gets hurt. And that doesn't bode well for your draft class.
Isn't it amazing, though, that with all the money and the resources and the analytics and the formulas and the different technologies and devices available, we're still no closer to cracking the code on finding the guys in round 1 that everyone believes, and that, everyone does believe going in that they're going to be great, but they actually become great. It still seems like it's the most elusive quality in the NFL, connecting any type of certainty between the pick you make and whether or not that guy is going to end up being a good player.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's really based on three different things. It's based on the evaluation of the player as a player. It's based on the player as a person. And also, as I alluded to earlier, the injury component. And so those three things usually conspire to, help your determination of the player. And so a lot of times, we can watch the tape and we can say, oh, this guy's a really talented player, but maybe we don't understand his drivers or motivations as a person. And sometimes, again, we might say this guy is wired the right way. He's a very good player, but he can't stay healthy. On the flip side of that, sometimes you get a guy that on tape looks like an average player and has the mentality, the personality to really succeed. And those guys usually overachieve. Those are the guys that go in the fourth, fifth round. And people say, how did that guy fall so far, 2 or 3 years later? Well, it's usually because there's something special about him and his personality that enables him to overachieve and become a better player than most people think.
I'm a firm believer, too, in the reality that for some guys, the indignity of going later than what they thought they would go lights a fire that might not otherwise have been there if they'd gone in the first round, if they hadn't been the 199th pick in the draft, or just like with receivers. I think if you fall to round 2, you got a potential Michael Thomas motivation where that never is going to go out. That fire isn't going to be extinguished. Is that real? Do you see that?
Yeah, we see that even in the phone calls that we make to these guys when we draft them. So there's really 3 different types of phone calls. There's the guy you call who expected to be picked. There's the guy that you call who he's so overcome with emotion because he can't believe he's gotten this far, and he's just so happy to even be picked. And then there's the third class of player that's kind of pissed off, quite honestly, that they didn't go higher than they should have been. And we had a few of those this year too. They're a little bit surly. They're a little bit sullen. They're a little bit short with you on the phone. They're very happy and relieved, but they're not over the top, ecstatic, or emotional because they wanted to be picked higher than they were picked.
I never thought of that aspect of it. It's almost a shoot the messenger type thing. You're the team that is ending the slide, but they're mad because you're the first one they get a chance to vent toward. Yeah. And, that I do think that's a real dynamic. We get motivated by all sorts of things as human beings. And that perception or reality of disrespect, I think, has fueled a lot of guys to be better than maybe they would have been. You guys have been excellent when it comes to compensatory draft picks. I think the Ravens understand and implement the formula as well, if not better than any team in the NFL. I'm curious about one thing, though, because this year, and I'll just use 2 guys as an example. You signed Sammy Watkins during the window where that counts toward the compensatory draft pick formula, but you waited on Alejandro Villanueva. What factors do you look at to decide which guy you'll make a move on, knowing that it's going to affect the compensatory draft pick formula, and which guys will you wait for?
Well, I don't want to get too much into this, but
I do. I want you to.
I know, but I think what we try to do, number one, is we look at the surplus or we look at the deficit. So how many players have we signed? How many players have we lost? That gives us an indication of how many comp picks we're going to get. Then we look at the type of comp pick that we would expect to get based on the contracts of the players who left. So, we can tell by the range of the average of the salary what that's going to be, what bucket that's going to fall into. And then we sort of talk about what we want to preserve and what picks would be worth preserving versus what picks are we comfortable giving away to get a good player. Once you get to that point, then you have to look at preserving those picks and how much money you could spend in a contract and still preserve those picks. And there's a slippery slope there. And there's a fine line there as to what that contract average has to be. And we spend a lot of time talking about that because if you end up spending a certain amount on a contract, then you're going to lose the comp pick. If you understand how the comp picks work and you spend under a specific amount, then you're going to preserve the comp picks that you want to preserve at the expense of the comp picks that you really don't care about throwing away. So, I think this is something over time that we've really done a really good job with. In the early days of the comp picks, we were very involved, but we didn't necessarily understand all the nuances. And I think over time, Pat Moriarty, Nick Matteo, Ozzie Newsome, they've done a really, really good job of understanding this complex thing and helping to help us make decisions that work for us.
And that commitment to maximizing the compensatory draft picks and not undermining the picks you may have available, To put it in terms that the average fan can understand, I sense that the Ravens particularly appreciate the fact that these draft picks ultimately are lottery tickets. And the more that you have to scratch off, the greater the chance you're going to get a winner.
Yeah, I think many years ago, there was a great article that was written. It was an economics article, and the authors, their basic premise was that the draft in and of itself is just a luck-driven process. And I believe that. These were two guys at the University of Chicago, and it was about 50 pages, and I couldn't understand a lot of the math, but I understood the basic points, which was the more picks you have, the better chance you're going to have of building a strong team. So we've always been one of those teams. We've tried to collect as many draft picks as possible, understanding that the draft picks are currency that we can use. And the thing is, yes, we have the draft picks to pick, but now we also have the draft picks to move up, to move down, to trade for future year picks. They create an amount of flexibility that we think is beneficial to the club.
And that value of waiting for the window to close on the compensatory draft pick formula, that hinges on the players still being available. And the guy that you signed this year, Alejandro Villanueva, why do you think he was available for as long as he was? I thought he'd have been gone by the time the compensatory draft pick window closed.
Yeah, good question. Over the years, we've signed some guys after the window. Darryl Smith was another guy a few years ago. I mean, more than a few years ago now, but he was a linebacker for us who was a very good player for us. Just no way of knowing. Sometimes it can be the fact that maybe the agent has overshot the market, possibly, in talking to teams. It could be something like an injury concern. I mean, there's a million different variables that go into that. We brought Allen a few weeks ago, spent some time with him. We were very impressed, and we started negotiations this week after we were not able to get a tackle in the draft. And, I think he liked our situation. We liked his situation. We've played against him twice a year, and we felt he was a good fit for the football team.
You had to breathe a sigh of relief when the Juwan James injury happened in Denver the same day that you announced the Villanueva signing, because with Mike Munchak there, the former offensive line coach in Pittsburgh, I assume the Broncos would have quickly come to the table.
In this business, Mike, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you get unlucky. I think we had a good plan. I do think that the fact that we were able to bring in Allen a few weeks ago and spend some time with him helped in that regard. I think that, there's other factors as well. His wife's got some family here, I believe. I think Al likes the fact that we're a military town with Annapolis down the road, Navy. It just was a good fit for him, and I think a good fit for us, and we're excited about it.
I don't know if you saw this before the draft, but Bucky Brooks of NFL Media floated a theory, an idea, a possibility that for your quarterback situation, maybe one way to go would be to draft a young guy and, as Bucky Brooks termed it, let Lamar Jackson graduate. Is that something that landed on your radar screen, and did you have any thoughts about that theory?
No, not really. We've got some good young quarterbacks that we like in Trace, McSorley, and Huntley. And obviously Lamar, we look at him as really a tremendous person and a great talent, and just a guy that we know we can build this team around. So we're very excited about the future. It's just really great to have a bunch of guys working together on offense that really care. And we're a different offense. We like that. We see an opportunity for us in terms of building our offense out and looking at different players that maybe other teams don't like quite as much. We have a good defense, a good special teams, a great coaching staff, and we think we're in prime position to succeed.
You've made it clear that you have every intent of signing Lamar Jackson to a long-term contract and keeping him on the team. The fact that he is up for a deal at the same time other quarterbacks from his draft class are up for new deals, does that complicate the process? Do you sense reluctance that, well, I want to see what the other guy gets before I try to get mine, because then that's my benchmark? Is any of that going on with these three quarterbacks from the class of 2018 who are all in line for new contracts?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we've been in situations like this. We were in a situation like this with Ronnie Stanley and Tunsil and Bakhtiari and guys like that. And then we were in a similar situation with Marlon Humphrey and Tre'Davious White and Jalen Ramsey. And so what I always think to myself is we're going to do the best deal we can for the Ravens. I mean, we certainly will consider other deals and other ways of doing deals and different things, but we're going to negotiate and do the best deal we can for the club that also makes sense for the player.
How does it complicate things for you that Lamar Jackson doesn't have a traditional agent?
You know, I don't know that it complicates things if it makes things easier. I'm not really sure. I think that the biggest thing is communication for me and Lamar to communicate. You know, we've already done a deal with Lamar. We did a rookie deal with Lamar. Now, obviously, it wasn't the same, but we did. We understand some of the complications because we did that prior deal. This is a much different deal with a much different structure and things like that. But I think that sometimes having the general manager and the salary cap people talking directly to the player really does improve communication. I mean, what we see sometimes is that we will have conversations with an agent, and in some cases, the player's not even aware of that. So that won't be the case here. I think the transparency will probably be pretty significant. That will be pretty good. And, you know, I hope that, you know, if Lamar has questions, he can get the answers. I know he has people that he trusts and respects that can help him and advise him, because this is a big deal, and we want to do it right. We want to do something he feels really good about, and we want to do something that we feel really good about as well.
It would seem to me that sometimes negotiations can become challenging. They can become difficult. Sometimes difficult things need to be said. It's got to be harder if you have to say something difficult directly to the player instead of to a third party that, you know, for example, if there's a concern about the player's skill set, a concern about this, a concern about that, that would knock down the value, it's just part of the negotiation ritual. It's got to be harder to say that directly to the player.
And I think that's true, Mike. One thing I've learned as a GM in my short time as a GM is that you have to have a lot of difficult conversations with players every single day. It could be about discipline. It could be about social media, a family issue, an on-the-field issue, an off-the-field issue. And as a GM, you've got to be able to do that. And if you can't do that, you probably should be doing something else.
I have a theory that, you know, we went from a time where every quarterback that played well enough to get a second contract, it was almost like the old game where you put your hand on the baseball bat, each guy goes one higher until you get to the top. I feel like that's changing now, that there's going to be tiers for quarterbacks. You're going to have a handful in the 45 million or more range, and then you're going to have other tiers for other levels of quarterback. Do you see it evolving that way? Because I just don't think it's sustainable for every quarterback who comes along. He's good enough that you want to keep him.
Yeah.
And the benchmark becomes getting more than whoever the highest paid quarterback is.
Well, I think that should apply in all aspects of football. GMs, coaches, players, all players, really. I mean, the best guys should be paid the most. And then, you know, you can't just expect to be paid more because you're the latest guy. And again, that's something that as a GM that you have to try to, you know, that point you have to try to make with your players. And the club is also obligated to do the best thing for the club based on the other good players on the team under the parameters of the salary cap. So we try to build something that we can sustain for a very long time. Other teams have been successful doing that. Some teams haven't, but we want to try to keep all of our good players as best as we can. And sometimes that means that you can't give all the money to certain players, and you know you have to make tough choices. In Lamar's case, we're talking about an MVP. We're talking about a quarterback. We're talking about one of our very, very best players. We know we've been fortunate to have a quarterback on a rookie deal. That's just part of it, and that's going to change at some point. And when it does, we'll have to make some tough decisions with the roster. But I would argue that's a good problem to have.
You had a great quote from one of your pre-draft press conferences about the receiver position, and you said that the receivers on the team are insulted by the perception that the receivers aren't very good, and you're personally insulted by it. And it was great. We played it on one of our shows. We reacted to it. And then you drafted two receivers, one in round one and one in round four. How do we reconcile what you said about the receivers before the draft with the fact that you drafted two more?
Well, it was before the draft. You know? What I would say is, like, anybody that tries to read too much into what people said before the draft, you know, they're acting foolish. And you know, we're trying to win. Everything we do is based on, does this help our club win? Does this put us in the best position to win? So, yeah, as you know, Mike, you write about it all the time. There's a lot of foolishness being said before the draft, anonymous scouts and things like that. We don't really play that game. But for me to stand up there and talk about how we're going to build the team, you know, before the draft is probably not the smartest thing in the world. So what I said really in my intentions was that I believe our receivers do want to be the best. They do care about that, and we believe in those guys. We're still going to build the very best team we can build at any point now, before the season, during training camp, after the season, whatever that might be. There's gamesmanship involved and there's a strategy involved. And for me to go up there and say we're going to draft a receiver in the first round, that would be foolish. And everybody should understand that. On the other hand, I do believe in our receivers, very strongly. I do believe in those guys. I do believe in Hollywood Brown, Miles Boykin, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Sammy Watkins. We do believe in those guys. We also believe in Bateman. We also believe in Thielen Wallace as well. And we think we've really, strengthened that class of players, and that's going to make us a better offense.
How much sleep did you lose the night before you sent Orlando Brown Jr. to the team that Lamar Jackson has called the Ravens' kryptonite, the Kansas City Chiefs?
That's tough. When you trade a good player, it's tough. When you trade a good player who's a great person, that's tougher. And this was a decision that we made, what we thought was probably best for the Ravens long term, and also probably, what the player really wanted. And we try to be a team that's going to do what's best for the club, but we also want to accommodate our players if possible. I've known Orlando since he was a little boy, because of his father's involvement with this franchise. And Orlando's a guy that does everything the right way. He's tough. He's physical. He's got a high care factor. I would have loved, and I think John would have loved, to keep Orlando here long term. It was going to be very tough with us based on the salary cap, based on the fact that we've got other good players coming up as well. And Orlando wants to be a left tackle. That's a lifelong dream of his. And so, it was hard to trade him. It was probably harder to trade him to the Chiefs, an organization that we respect, a very talented organization, a Super Bowl winning organization. That was a challenge. But again, as a GM, I've got to look at the short term of the franchise and also the long term of the franchise. And for us to get what we did, given the parameters we're under, it seemed like the smart thing to do.
Hey, last one for you, and I appreciate you giving me so much time. Schedule comes out Wednesday night, May 12th. What's the first thing you look at when it pops up on your phone?
December. I look at the December games because I know those are going to be critically important, and those can really, impact your team. Last year was a great example. Our schedule was very tough at the beginning of the year, and our December schedule was pretty fortuitous. And we ran the table, and that was a great thing for us to get into the playoffs, momentum and all those kind of things. So I think the December games are very, very big. We'll look at the home and aways in December. I'll look at that, and we'll see what it looks like.
Are you confident there's going to be full stadiums in Baltimore?
I hope. I'm hopeful. We came out with a statement this week that we would hope that and expect that. Hopefully this country continues to do what it's doing. I think vaccinations will be a big deal. I think all that stuff's important. And I do hope sincerely that we can have 100% capacity in our stadiums this year. That'd be a great thing for Baltimore, for the city, for the community, for our fans. And we really do hope that to be the case.
Well said. And I appreciate so much some of your time. Congratulations on another draft. Congratulations on 25 years with the Baltimore Ravens. Here's to 25 more, Eric. Thanks.
Hey, Mike, one last question. When did you come out to training camp that time? How many years ago was that? Remember that? Man,
2006.
Was that what it was?
Yes.
Wow.
Long time ago.
Long time ago.
Long time ago. Hopefully we'll get back there again sometime soon. I hope for another 25 more for me, and I hope for another 25 more for you, and I look forward to talking to you again next time.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.